Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. As many of you in Britain prepare to celebrate the new year, spare a thought for those of the poor who have only to depend on food banks and soup kitchens to survive. The number who rely on this, most basic form of charity, is increasing dramatically in the UK. But is charity a good solution? Shouldn't the state provide a safety net for its most needy citizens? Here to discuss the issues are former Labour MP Dawn Butler, Chief Executive of the Taxpayers Alliance Matthew Sinclair, and on the phone we're joined by Chris Mould. He's Executive Chairman of the Trussell Trust, who have set up more than 300 food banks across the UK. Welcome to the programme, everybody. Dawn, do you think that this is a good idea, that basically what's being proposed here, what will happen I think in April, is that local authorities will no longer have the money to provide this kind of basic provision, and it will be in some way channelled through these charity organisations?
I think what it does, it takes away fundamentally what charities are supposed to be there for. Charities are not there to be the safety blanket. I mean, that's what the welfare state was designed to be. If you like, charities are there to be a comfort blanket. So it's not something, it shouldn't be your first port of call, because charities are full of people who volunteer. And so by nature of how they are funded and what they do means that they're not a sustainable way for people to get help and aid. And I think with the growing rise now in terms of the people having to get a card or credit to go and, for 3 days food, I think all of that is very, very worrying to where we're going in society.
Matthew, does it concern you that this seems to be a step back beyond the point where the welfare state was established to perhaps a more Victorian sense of how we deal with poor people in society?
Well, I think the welfare state was always supposed to be a complement to charity, not a substitute for it. I think these were always supposed to be working together, and there'll be different things which the charitable sector and which the government can do best. The government is still providing a safety net. There is still that benefit system there to provide the income, but there will always be people who have particular circumstances, which means that isn't enough, or that isn't the kind of help they need. And there'll be times when the charities can step in and help there. And at the moment, when people are pushed right to the brink by the facts that incomes have been rising slower than prices for a few years now, I think it's brilliant that there are people out there who are stepping up and helping with food banks. And I think it would be terrible if that wasn't the case. There is huge pressure on budgets, whether it's budgets in the public sector, whether it's families' budgets, whether it's whether it's anyone within the community. Lots of people are struggling at the moment, and if we can help each other, if we can first look to help our community as well as helping our own family, then that will help us get through this. That will help us get through to a scenario in which we can start to not trust this is going to last forever, not hope this is going to, but we can look after people and feed people until they can start to rebuild, so they can start to build their income.
Forever. If you're taking away the social funds, and you're saying to councils, right? So you're taking away
people stuck on the social fund.
You're taking away social fund loans, which are there to target people who are the most needy for whatever their specific circumstances are. And then you're saying, right, with this budget, which is now not going to be ring fenced for the most vulnerable, we're going to give it to charities to then do what they do. It's a sleight of hand.
It's because sometimes
just let me bring in Chris Mould here, because I mean, Chris, welcome to the programme. You'll be on the sharp end of this. What do you understand will change, and are you happy with it?
First off, we believe that from April 2013, social fund payments, that's community care grants and crisis loans, the responsibility is being devolved to local authorities. So it is a change of decision-making place. People locally will be making decisions about who gets what and how much. But, and this is a very, very important but, the amount of money that's being shared by the local authorities is significantly less than was spent this year by central government. They're going back to the 5-6 years ago and the spend levels then, which are much lower. That means that we anticipate lots more people will not get crisis loans who would get them today, and people won't get community care grants who'd get them today. There'll be less money to go around. So with our food banks, we're anticipating an increasing number of people being referred because they're in desperate crisis and need food.
And will you be in a situation where, or organisations like yours, where you're effectively administering this, whereas it was some form of government, local or national body which have done it in the past?
That's been suggested by some local authorities, and we've had a careful think about it and decided as a policy within the Trussell Trust Food Bank network, which is independent, we receive no government support, no government funding, that we would not enter into any contractual arrangement with any local authority to operate their system locally. And that is because the food that we give away is donated by the public. It's given by local people who want to help their neighbours when they're in crisis. And we don't want to get into any form of confusion where the public might think that they're subsidising taxpayers who are actually, sidestepping their duty to provide a basic safety net for people who live in the UK.
Matthew, that's a completely understandable reaction from the charities, isn't it? That they don't want to do work and they don't want to be seen by the people to whom they give as doing work which would have properly been regarded only a few weeks earlier as a state provision.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many big charities now where the vast majority of their funding comes from governments, from Oxfam to Thamesreach. There are these big charities with millions of pounds in government grants, and I think that does raise questions about the value for money which someone giving their own money to that charity can receive. But it doesn't mean that there aren't other ways that the public sector and the charitable sector can work together, as they always have. They've always been. The food banks aren't new. They may be growing, but they aren't new. They've always been there alongside sensible state provision. And I don't really see anything wrong with that continuing. None of these services, whether it's the state services or the charitable services, are supposed to be a long-term solution to people's problems. They're there to look after them in a crisis, to get them through that crisis. The only thing which will give people a better income, a better sense of fulfilment, a long-term prosperity is, in the end, work and growth and jobs. Absolutely.
Right. But there
and
are
that's
no
what
jobs. The sector's
well, yeah,
not
but
growing.
we're not going to accept that that's some kind of permanent settlement, are we?
You've got 6.1 million people, working families, who are now living on the poverty line.
So let's try and do something about that.
Exactly. So we have to do something
about
that.
That's got nothing to do with whether food banks or not.
What we do about it is not giving money to charities for them to
no, well, that's doing about something else, isn't it? It's just a different problem.
So that's not how you cope with the problem. I mean, we have problems in schools where children are not being fed, where half of the teachers are having to feed kids themselves out of their own pocket. We have a growing problem in society, which is being exacerbated by the government and their policies.
Food banks aren't supposed to solve all the world's problems. They're just there to deal with a specific situation. Sure, people get fed.
Let me just ask, Dawn, is your concern here that, Matthew says, this is a temporary solution, but yeah, we've been hearing this from the government since 2008. The most recent budget has just said, actually, guys, this is going to last much further into the future than I told you it was.
And if it was a temporary solution, why change policy? Why change policy if it's a temporary solution? You don't have to change policy if it's a temporary solution. You might encourage charities. I mean, charities have seen a 25% cut. They've seen 1,400 people being made redundant themselves in a charity. So they're not actually coping with the demand themselves. I do work for the CAB. They're not coping with the demand themselves. They're having to lose people. They're losing money. So it doesn't quite correlate that, this is a temporary solution, yet still we're making it worse. We're taking away what you need to do. It doesn't make sense.
Each individual person has a temporary problem, but these problems aren't going away, and we should be setting policy in the right way for the longer term, because even if the economy improves, there will still be people in a crisis, and we've got to get it right. And so, for example, I think localising it so people can try new things, which are designed, for example, to ensure that these kinds of benefits are less likely to be spent on alcohol, so ensuring that they're better targeted. These are the kind of voucher schemes you're talking about. That seems like something that's worth trying and giving more local flexibility is good news.
I find it quite offensive that whenever...
Well, you don't think people have problems with alcohol abuse?
I find it quite offensive that whenever there's a problem, it's always blamed on people
Where's the blame in that?
shirkers,
Where's the blame in
spending
that?
money on alcohol.
This is in your mouth, not
spending
mine.
money on. I always find it
Let's
quite
conduct the
offensive.
interview so that we ask a question, we allow each other to make the answer, and then we reply to it rather than constantly interrupting in the process.
I find it quite offensive because I think there are people, I said 6.1 million people who are working, okay, who can now not afford to feed themselves or their children. There are parents going without a main meal so they can feed their children. So we have an issue here and we have a problem here. And where I agree with you is that what we have to do is set policies that make things better for the poorer people in society. We are judged as a country to how we treat the poorest people in our society. And when Save the Children have to divert funds away from Africa to the UK to help poor children in the UK, it shows you that we have a huge problem. And what do we do to that problem? What we don't do is blame the people who are suffering.
Okay, let me bring Chris back in now. I mean, Chris, should we disaggregate this a moment? Because there are two issues, it seems to me, involved in here. Who provides the support? Is it the charities or is it the state? And you made the point earlier that actually the total amount of money, so that we're also debating a cut in provision, whoever provides it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's plenty of evidence going back through many decades that locally organised charitable solutions are efficient and effective, and there is a really sensible piece of policy thinking to be done about challenging the assumption that the only organisations that can efficiently help people when they're in trouble are going to be state organisations employing people who are employees of the state. I mean, that's a debate to be had. There's lots of evidence that the state is often bureaucratic, cumbersome and inefficient, and that local organisations can be very flexible. There are questions about accountability, and there are challenges associated with that, and we've seen some evidence of difficulty over accountability in the last 5 to 10 years, as many more charities have become agents of government, and their primary source of income has been government resources. But I mean, that's a debate about efficiency. The question, what do we do about the problem is more profound. We don't want to see people in crisis. We don't want to see people living on a knife edge where they fall into trouble, because actually it costs an awful lot to their peace of mind and their lives in general, but also to the taxpayer. I mean, we in the food bank meet people day in, day out who are at risk of losing their homes, who have been referred by social workers who are trying to decide whether to take a child into temporary foster care because they're worried about neglect. It's so much more sensible, if government could fix it, for the people involved to receive a proper income that was sufficient to keep them stably at home, able to support their children. It's much, much cheaper than foster care, bed and breakfast for people who've been rendered homeless, prison for people who've committed crimes because they're desperate and they can't find any other way to make ends meet than to steal, and so on. So there's logic in prevention and thinking the policy through in a joined-up way.
Do you think, are you happy with the level of direction that's given here, that you can have this money, actually not money, you're going to have a credit that you can use for this but not for that?
Well, I mean, this is the point I was making earlier. The food bank network that the Trussell Trust operates has said, no, we don't want to get involved in that kind of substitution arrangement with the social fund. We've been running for many years. Our first food bank started in 2000, where social workers, health visitors, doctors, police officers and teachers hold vouchers for our food banks, and they refer people to us when they see those people in crisis and deem them needing the food help. But there's no monetary transaction, and we want to keep it that way. We want to say to a local social worker, if you meet a client who's in trouble and you think that would benefit from 3 days plus of nutritionally balanced food because it would help you with your job of working with them to make life better for them, please use the food bank.
Okay, let me just bring Matthew in on this, because Matthew, I mean, you're against the sort of big state, the Taxpayers Alliance, but
Absolutely.
are you happy with an intrusive state that says you're going to have these credits which are for this purpose and not for that purpose? Aren't you in danger? Isn't this a policy which is in danger of infantilizing the people that it's giving the support to?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why you don't want these policies to be this kind of level of support to be used in anything but the most desperate cases. But there are cases where people do find themselves in a position where they can't take care of themselves, and that's where in a lot of these emergencies, when you're talking about social services or police or the hospitals being involved, we are often talking about cases where people have come to a point where they are struggling to look after themselves, and that is, I think, the point at which you do need much more active intervention in their lives. And I think any of us would be comfortable being the norm for anyone over their lifetime. But people find themselves at this point, and I think our objective should be to provide them with that help in the as you said, the least cumbersome, the least bureaucratic, the most efficient way possible, and then get them back on their feet by ensuring that we've got the economy where, for everything from tax policy to regulatory policy, there's the dynamic growing economy. It's creating the opportunities for people to make a better life for themselves. I think that's got to be the two parts of the story.
Dawn, do you think that this is, that perhaps this is a case where the government likes to so-called get the state off people's backs when it's a question of money, but wants to interfere more heavily in their lives when it's a question of how to spend the less money they're giving them?
Yeah, I mean, it is actually quite. I mean, nobody's going to disagree with the fact that if people need help, they should get help, and they should get help quickly and efficiently, and they should be spending money, if you like, in the most efficient way. And all of that as well goes down to education. Nutrition and stuff goes down to education. But the government's interference on that level to how you spend is almost stripping people of their dignity, and it's also ensuring that they don't feel, if you want to inspire people to go out and work, if you want to inspire people to say, okay, take control of your life and your family, you have to give them the tools to do that. If you turn around and say, right, here you go, here's a card. I remember being part of a campaign to stop the government. I remember being part of a campaign to stop the government when we had asylum seekers coming in and giving asylum seekers credits and things like that. And I remember being part of that campaign. And I think the whole system is stripping away people's dignity and people's rights when they're most in need. And what we don't need to do is shame them. What we need to do is support them. And I don't think that this system is supporting. Charities are there for a reason. They grow organically. And they're there for a reason. What they don't need is the state taking control of them, which effectively is what they would do. The state is there for a purpose. They need to serve that purpose. And that's what the welfare state is there for. You're stripping away the welfare state bit by bit by bit. That is what's happening here. It's the smoke and mirrors. The welfare state is being dismantled piece by piece by piece.
I mean, if you want to talk about charities not being dependent on the state, then you want to not think about these little charities and these little food banks. There are charities getting multi-million-pound grants. I mean, do you want to start cutting back on the grants to Oxfam? Do you want to start cutting back on the grants to Save the Children? Save the Children is, in large part, a state-funded organisation. There's quite a big claim to make if you want to get state funding out of charities. I think that the reality is...
I'm not talking about completely taking away state funding out of charities, because, as we said, you localised charities do really great work. What I'm talking about is how this new system in the welfare bill reform is actually being implemented. And when you're taking away social fund loans and saying, and it's going back to 2005, before there was a recession. Yeah. So when you're taking away that social fund loan and saying, right, okay, this is not going to be ring-fenced, it means that councils who are strapped for cash, who are finding it difficult to manage, may spend that money on something else and not on those people that are most in need.
Let me just bring Chris back in. Chris, I mean, you're saying that the Trussell Trust, your organisation, won't really be involved in this, has taken a decision not to be involved in this. But I wonder if I could ask you to make a judgment about what might happen across the entire sector. Do you see many other organisations, charity organisations, actually engaging with this process? Do you think it's going to work? Is it going to become widespread?
Let me just clarify. We're definitely involved because we're going to feed somewhere around 250,000 people this coming year who are referred by state employed care professionals, social workers, doctors and police officers and so on. We're definitely involved. We expect to see a lot more people in crisis this next year. We don't want that, of course we don't, but it's just a reality because we expect the government policy, when applied from April 2013, to create more vulnerability in society because fewer people will be able to manage because the incomes they have will not be sufficient and their recourse to social fund loans, crisis care loans, will be reduced. So we're going to be involved. That's the first thing. What we have said is that we're not going to enter a contract with a local authority to provide a service. That's very specific because we don't see ourselves as appropriate agents of government. We're not an arm of government, a different way of doing what government does. We're a supplement to it, and we are different. And the communities that support us do so because they care about their neighbours. The people who come to food banks, and these are tens of thousands of people that we've surveyed, tell us often that we're the place where they first time don't feel judged. So this point that Dawn was making about dignity is quite complex. It's scary and it's quite shame-making to be sent to a food bank because you can't get food on the table. Of course it is. But the people who come tell us that it's the first time they've met people who aren't questioning them, starting from an attitude of disbelief, suspecting them of not telling the truth about their circumstances. They often come from the job centres, for example, and they are greatly relieved when they turn up in a food bank and find they're treated differently.
So, but just let me bring you back to that essential point about the contractual relationship between charities and the state. Do you think that other organisations may take a different view to you, and do you think that will become a widespread method of delivering what was previously a state provision?
I think it's possible. I don't know what will happen because the amount of money available is massively reduced on what is currently being spent this year. And any charity entering into a negotiation with a local authority has to bear that in mind, that the amount that the local authority has to spend is severely constrained in relation or comparison to the demand that's likely to be there. And that's the issue. Charity
Chris, just let me get Matthew's response to that particular point, because Chris has made the point now again and again in the course of this interview that whatever else is going on here, there is going to be a cut in provision, and at an absolutely critical moment in the process of the crisis, there are going to be more people walking through his door. Is that part of the decision something that you support?
The decision's going to be made by councils about striking their own priorities. That's really important. Is that we talk about not wanting to have individuals having so much of their life circumscribed, but the same should be true for communities. And councils can strike their own priorities. So over a decade, till 2006-07, councils increased the number of staff they had earning more than £50,000 ninefold, whereas it increased threefold in the rest of the economy. There was a big, massive increase in that local authority middle management bureaucracy, with all of the costs attendant on that. If councils can do what they do more efficiently, and plenty of local authorities have shown how to do that here in London, they will be able to look after those who are in need, do their most important jobs in the community, and deliver value to the local taxpayer. The critical responsibility that's on councils now, because we're not in this world where we can just wish billions out of the economy into public spending anymore. We're not in the world where we can pretend that public finances are in this glorious place where we can keep throwing this money at the problem. Councils are going to need to work more efficiently. If they do that, they can look after those who are most in need, and they can do it in better ways than central government can.
Okay, Dawn, do you think that money is there, that that if we reduced enough managers' pay that we could get back the kind of money that we're talking about here?
I don't think the solution to the problems is to reduce the number of staff at the town hall. Yes, maybe some of them are overstaffed. I know that there's many town halls that have got voluntary redundancy programmes currently on the way. I don't think that's the solution. And yes, we all want to get the bill down. Nobody's saying that we're in this euphoria world where there's lots of money there and the public purse is bulging and there's lots of money to be distributed everywhere. But the fact is, if you looked at the fact of situation, the fact is there is a pot of money there that's ring-fenced for vulnerable people. It's the same with homelessness. There's ring-fence money for homelessness that's been taken away. So that means the homeless people are not going to be dealt with. All of this is systematic. You are fundamentally taken away and distributed destroying people that are at the lower ebbs of society. So
Ring
the
fence doesn't
money,
mean
the
stop.
money,
Okay.
no, ring fence means that this money is only to be spent on those people that are most in need. If you give the money to the council and you say, right, okay, now you can spend this money however you see fit and whatever you see fit, there's no guarantee that those people that are most in need will get that money.
Okay, and on that
There's
point,
no
I'm afraid I'm
guarantee.
going to have to stop you both there because we've run out of time. So that's the end of the first half of the programme, but we will be back for a second half. We'll be discussing the role of Muslim women in the workplace. Please do come back after the break.